All right. Well, thank you for the songs this morning. We'll be going to Genesis chapter 44. As we continue to get close to the end of this book, this is message number 45 in this series. The title of this message is Let Me Be a Slave. We'll be looking at Genesis chapter 44, and I'm going to start by reading verses 1 and 2. And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money. And he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. So, chapter 43 that we looked at last time brought Jacob to the inevitable decision. Their food supply had run out, and they had to return to Egypt. But that meant that Benjamin would have to go along with the rest of Jacob's sons. And of course, Jacob is continuing to misread all of these events. He thought that all of these things were working together and meant evil against him. Now, the brothers themselves make a return visit to Egypt where Joseph was ready for them. And even though he is still disguised, he receives them into his house. He gives them a great feast that they enjoy. He shows partial treatment to Benjamin deliberately at that feast to further set up his brothers. And this part of Joseph's story, it develops somewhat slowly, and Moses is obviously increasing the suspense. He's increasing the tension by it. But he's also highlighting the fact that Joseph is proceeding by a plan. And if you were reading this account and you didn't know how these events would turn out, it seems like that Joseph is sort of fattening them up for the kill. Like he's just dragging out this long, elaborate revenge plot that he has cooked up. But that is actually not the case at all. But it is proceeding by a plan. And of course, the fact that Joseph is wise, that he has wisdom from God, is pointed out in the account as well. So it brings us to chapter 44, and it brings Joseph's testing of his brothers to its peak. So the deliberation of everything is shown once again. Joseph has been wise in testing his brothers, and he's setting up conditions where they have previously failed. So if you think about it and you read it in the context of what has happened to Joseph, and you think about what he's setting up with Benjamin and his brothers, you realize that Joseph is setting up a very similar scenario. He's giving them a very similar opportunity that they had in regard to Joseph. They failed where they acted sinfully. So getting Benjamin to Egypt provides that opportunity that Joseph needs. And this chapter builds up to this scene with Joseph and Judah, and we witness the amazing transformation of Judah as it is made evident in this particular chapter. So we want to look at it in two parts, verses 1 to 17, where we find a cup among brothers, and in verses 18 to 34, which is pretty much all of Judah's speech. So let's begin here with the first part. We'll look at verses 1 to 5. And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money. And he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their asses. And when they were gone out of the city, and not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, Up, follow after the men, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, Wherefore have you rewarded evil for good? Is not this it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divineth? Ye have done evil in so doing. So after the feast, when the morning time came, it was time for Joseph's brothers to return to Jacob and to their families. And Joseph prepared for their departure by commanding the steward of his house. They were to fill the sacks with food, and they were to give them, as Joseph says, as much as they could carry. Now, this is probably means that he's actually giving them more food than their money's worth that they had brought with them. Once again, they were to put each man's money back in the sack. And then also, we have a new development. They were to take Joseph's silver cup and they were to place it in Benjamin's sack. Now, this cup is identified as his divination cup, meaning that the cup was more valuable than just the silver alone. We'll talk a little bit more about that divination cup in just a moment. But right from the start, it's being singled out as this is a piece that's of special significance and value, even more than just, again, the metal itself was worth. So they left early, we're told, as soon as it was light. And Joseph gave them enough time to get out of the city. And then he instructs his steward to go after them and instructs him concerning the cup. Now, twice you see in these verses that Joseph mentions evil that had been done by his brothers. And the steward is to press this home on them. And he also mentions that his cup is for divining. So this cup is obviously featured throughout this chapter. It's a particular piece of interest for us. Most likely, as we are reading this account, remember, Joseph has essentially disguised himself as this governor over Egypt, which he actually was, but he was concealing his true identity from his brothers. So most likely, as he's referring to this cup as a cup of divination, it's a part of the disguise that he has going. So the cup in itself was important for high officials within Egypt. And so, again, it was much more valuable than the metal it was made from. It would be more akin to maybe like stealing a president's presidential seal or something that was very significant and specific to his office, that was a part of his identification and what have you. So by mentioning divining, he's also going to be emphasizing to his brothers that he has insight. Now, I don't think that we should take this to mean that Joseph actually used divinations, but again, that this is part of the disguise, something that obviously the Egyptians did use and something that high officials were known for in that time. So I don't think we have to take it as meaning that he actually practiced divination, and I don't believe that he did. But he did have insight, and already Moses has pointed out how that Joseph's brothers have been made to marvel and wonder at the insight that Joseph has seemed to have. And if you recall back to the feast the night before, they were all seated in an arrangement that was in an arrangement of their age, from the oldest down to the youngest. And they noticed this, and they were quite surprised by it. One of the many surprises that they met with the day before. So Joseph is highlighting to them the fact that this is something very valuable, something that he would take very seriously, and the fact that he's a man of insight, meaning that they're not going to be able to conceal anything from him. He's communicating, in effect, to them, he knows more than they do. Then we get to verses 6 to 13. And he overtook them, that would be the steward, and he spake unto them these same words. And they said unto him, Wherefore saith my Lord these words? God forbid that thy servants should do according to this thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of thy Lord's house silver or gold? With whomsoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondmen. And he said, Now also let it be according unto your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless. Then they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched, and began at the eldest, and left at the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes, and laid every man his ass, and returned to the city. All right, so Joseph's steward is the primary actor in this part. He's the one that Joseph had just instructed in the previous verses to go after his brothers, and these are the things you're to do and say. And so the steward is carrying out these orders. And you notice that the brothers begin by pleading their innocence. For one thing, they know that they have not stolen any cup, so they know that they're innocent of that. And they give as an example the fact that they had returned with the money that they thought was mistakenly put in their sacks from the time previous. In other words, they're trying to demonstrate, we've conducted ourselves honestly with you. We've not stolen anything. And then they offer, by way of confirming their innocence, they offer to let the offender be executed and the rest of the brothers to become slaves. Now, obviously, this has a somewhat eerie echo of what happened, in fact, with Joseph, because their plan for Joseph at first was to kill him, and then eventually they sold him as a slave. And so this whole scenario has a ring of what we might call poetic justice to it, like is common in wisdom literature. And the fact that the Bible teaches us, and we see it in history, we see it in life, that we tend to reap what we sow. We tend to suffer wrongs in the way that we have wronged others. And that does tend to happen. Well, the steward himself, he accepts their terms, sort of, but you notice that he changes it to where the guilty one with the cup will be made a slave, and then the rest will be innocent. Now, this is obviously setting up the test that Joseph has designed. And for them all to become slaves would be one thing, but it would be far more tempting for the brothers if only Benjamin would be a slave and then they could go free. In other words, that would be much more tempting to them. They could sacrifice Benjamin and they could go free. Again, setting up a situation that's very similar to where they were with Joseph 22 years before this. So the servants then take down the sacks and they open them and they begin searching through them. And once again, it's noted that they begin with the sack of the oldest and then they proceed in order to the youngest. So Benjamin would be the last one whose sack was open, which is actually where the cup was. And every other brother would be shown to be clear, as they would have gone from the eldest one by one all the way down to Benjamin. Every sack would have been open, and only Benjamin's would have had the cup. Now, when the brothers see that Benjamin's sack has the cup, we're told that they tear their clothes, referring to a cloak or to an outer garment. Now, the tearing of clothes, along with other things such as the putting on of sackcloth, the sitting in ashes, these were signs and expressions of grief. And in fact, it's what Jacob did when he thought that Joseph was dead back in chapter 37 and verse number 34. And so now they have come to a great expression of grief when they find out that Benjamin's sack has the cup. Look at verses 14 to 17. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said unto them, What deed is this that ye have done? Wot ye not that such a man as I can certainly divine? And Judah said, What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak, or how shall we clear ourselves? God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. And he said, God forbid that I should do so. But the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get you up in peace unto your father. So they came back into the city and back to Joseph's house. And once again, you notice, they bowed before Joseph. Of course, this reminds us once again of Joseph's dream and how all of these things are under God's guiding providence. And these are those sort of little clues as you go along to realize how that God is working his plan through all of these different events. Now, Joseph spoke sternly to them, and we get a response to Joseph from Judah. As Judah is sort of emerging over the last several chapters. He's sort of emerging in the picture as a leader of the brothers because Reuben and Simeon and Levi all have essentially disqualified themselves as leaders of the tribes of Jacob. So Judah steps forward and he responds by accepting the sentence of slavery for them all. And Judah is still at this point misreading events somewhat. Now, he probably is closer than what Jacob is in his discernment of these events and what they mean. He has accepted the fact that they are being punished by God for their sins against their brother Joseph and against their father Jacob. And so at this point, he sees no other option than suffering for their sins. So he doesn't try to protest their innocence. He doesn't seem to see this as a setup in any way at all. But then Joseph counters what Judah had to say, and he counters it by saying, no, only the one that had the cup is going to be made a slave. And of course, that word it does mean a slave, and it's translated servant here several times, and bondman and such, but it does mean a slave. He will be made a slave, and the others can return in peace with their food to their father. Now, it's clear that Joseph is testing his brothers, and that he has set up quite an elaborate test that has put them in a position now to betray their brother and to save their own freedom. And that brings us to the second part of the chapter, which is just about all taken up with Judah's speech. Let's begin with verses 18 to 23. Then Judah came near unto him and said, O my Lord, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not thine anger burn against thy servant, for thou art even as Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servants, saying, Have ye a father or a brother? And we said unto my Lord, We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother, and his father loveth him. And thou saidst unto thy servants, Bring him down unto me, that I may set my eyes upon him. And we said unto my Lord, The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. And thou saidst, Thy servants, except your youngest brother come down with you, ye shall see my face no more. So Judah at this point steps forward and to speak very closely with Joseph. And he begins here by telling the history of these events. And at this point, he's rehearsing things that Joseph knows. He's talking about their first visit, how that Joseph questioned them, how they answered those questions, how that things were left, that if they were to come back and to be able to buy grain again, they would have to bring their youngest brother with them. All those sort of things Joseph already knows. So he's obviously giving this account from Jacob's perspective, because the effect on Jacob is what is central in what Judah has to say. And I believe that's why he states plainly that the brother is dead at this point, whereas before we saw them being a little unclear about exactly what they thought about that. But no doubt, this is certainly, from Jacob's perspective, this is what has taken place. Then we come to verses 24 to 29. And it came to pass, when we came up unto thy servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, Go again and buy us a little food. And we said, We cannot go down. If our youngest brother be with us, then will we go down. For we may not see the man's face, except our youngest brother be with us. And thy servant, my father, said unto us, Ye know that my wife bare me 2 sons. And the one went out from me, and I said, Surely he is torn in pieces, and I saw him not since. And if you take this also from me, and mischief befall him, ye shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Now at this point, Judah is relating to Joseph what happened on their return from their first trip to Egypt. So these would be events and conversations and such that Joseph did not know about at this point. And Judah is making a point here as he's relaying this to Joseph. He's making a point of the fact that Jacob was very reluctant to send Benjamin to Egypt and why he was so reluctant. Obviously, it was difficult for Jacob, and only the most dire need caused him to agree and to send Benjamin. In other words, he had to come to the place where there simply was no other option. And Judah's communicating this to Joseph. And of course, Joseph certainly is going to know the truth of that because he knows about the famine. He knows its severity, and he knew that they would have to return for food. So Judah is filling in these details. Let me get to verses 30 to 32. Now, therefore, when I come to thy servant my father, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life, it shall come to pass when he seeth that the lad is not with us, that he will die. And thy servant shall bring down the gray hairs of thy servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, if I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. So Judah is reaching now the conclusion of his speech here to Joseph. Jacob loved Benjamin, and his life is bound up with him. Judah said that if he returns to Jacob without his son Benjamin, Jacob would die in sorrow. Furthermore, Judah was letting Joseph know that he himself had become surety for Benjamin. So he's letting Joseph know that he has obligated himself. And we talked about that when Judah was speaking with Jacob about becoming surety. Essentially, Judah was offering that if he failed to bring Benjamin back, that he would be irreconcilably cut off from his father Jacob. He would lose his inheritance. He would lose his possession. He would lose his position. He would lose his future in the family. Essentially, he would forfeit everything irreconcilably, irretrievably, if he fails to bring Benjamin back. And so now he's communicating that to Joseph. He had become surety for him. And so Joseph knows through what Judah is saying, that Judah has essentially pledged himself in the place of Benjamin. And then look at verses 33 and 34. Now, therefore, I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father, and the lad be not with me? Lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come on my father. So Judah now finishes this speech by offering himself as the slave in Benjamin's place. Now, this is obviously motivated by love for his brother and his father, and particularly for his father and the effect on him. And if you notice, Judah's offer would still effectively cut him off and disinherit him from his father and his brothers. So in other words, as Judah's making this is not a negotiation. You know, when you come to a negotiation, there's sort of a give and take, and we're trying to find some happy medium, you know, where this side gets what it is that they want and need, and this other side gets what they want and need, so that everybody's able to leave satisfied. Now that's sort of an ideal negotiation. But Judah is not negotiating with Joseph. He's not trying to work out some sort of a deal by which he's going to be able to maybe limit and minimize his losses and his costs and still be able to come out all right. Judah says, no, don't take Benjamin as a slave. Let me be the slave. If he goes back without Benjamin, he's disinherited and cut off. If he takes Benjamin's place and becomes the slave, he's still disinherited and cut off. So in other words, it's lose-lose for Judah. And yet he's willing to do so and prefers it to any other scenario. So this plan that Judah offers just has no personal benefits for him. There's no personal gain for Judah in this scenario. Rather, it comes at a great cost to him. And this willingness of self-sacrifice is the most Christ-like act that we read in the book of Genesis. This attitude, this act, this willingness to sacrifice and give himself at a great cost and loss and hurt to himself, it truly is the most Christ-like act that we see in this book. So as we think about this chapter, you realize that Judah's turnaround is every bit dramatic as the turnaround of circumstances were for Joseph. Judah has been, as if we go back and think back to the chapters and this whole long section, Judah has been a selfish character. He has been inconsiderate of others. He has willingly betrayed, lied, and benefited personally from the suffering of others. He has been jealous and begrudging. He hated Joseph because of the preferential treatment that Jacob showed to him. He was jealous of him. He was willing even to kill Joseph. Eventually, they put him in the pit. They sit down and eat and refresh themselves, and then he sells him for money. And Judah was a leader in this selling Joseph for slavery. We might as well, what's it going to profit us if we just leave him in this pit and he just dies? We can make something off of this. So for money, he sells his brother into slavery. And then later, think about his daughter-in-law and how all of those things went out. And Judah has consistently been a selfish, inconsiderate character out for his own gain. But now, he humbly commits a selfless act of self-sacrifice that would not benefit him in any way. He offered his life for his brother Benjamin, and he was motivated by love for Jacob and by seeking for his good. So Joseph's supreme test has been passed, and change has truly come to his brothers who mistreated him over 22 years earlier. So if we think about this turnaround and what it might communicate to Israel in history and what it might communicate to us today, one reason why we suffer many times in ways that we do is because of how fueled by jealousy and selfishness that we are. I mean, if you just let me feel that I have been slighted and I'm ready to call down fire from heaven and burn up cities. How dare you? How dare someone slight me, deny to me what I clearly deserve? And when you think about it, all relationships are wrecked this way. Whether it's relationships in marriages or in families or in churches or workplaces or organizations or communities or states or countries, people acting motivated out of selfishness wrecks these relationships because of selfishly seeking our own benefit, our own praise, our own comfort, our own position, our own opinions and ideas being advanced, our own wants and needs. it wrecks and ruins every relationship that we can enter into as human beings. Well, as believers in Jesus Christ, and I do believe we are seeing a changed Judah. We are seeing a converted man here in this chapter. And as believers in Jesus Christ, we are called to be followers of Jesus Christ. We're called to be imitators of Jesus Christ. And again, Judah shows the most Christ-like act and attitude of anything that we see in the book of Genesis in this chapter. What this means then is that, well, we are called to love others as Christ has loved us. In John 13:34, Jesus said, "A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another." And of course, Jesus would go on later in a couple of chapters explaining that he considered them more than friends because he laid down his life for them. And he says, love one another as I have loved you. And we are called to lay down our lives for each other. 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. Hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. We are called to put others before ourselves. And really, when you think about it, there's just a real essence of love in putting someone, their needs and things ahead of ourselves. Well, we are told in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. And we are called to this because of Christ's selfless, supreme, sacrificing love for us. We are called to be imitators. And Jesus told his disciples in the Gospel of John that all men will know that you are my disciples when you love each other this way. So what we see here in Genesis chapter number 44, as all of this is unfolding in the land of Egypt, and it's not all clear to the Egyptians yet what all is going on. But as we see this unfolding, we see how that Judah and his brothers are actually becoming witnesses to the nations. And that, of course, is what we are called to be as well. All right, and that's all of our message for this morning. We will close with a hymn.